The Wild West cowboy, as we know him, emerged in the late 19th century, shaped by the rugged and unforgiving landscape of the American frontier. The West was a land that tested the limits of those who dared to tame it, harsh in climate, terrain, and wildlife. Yet, amid its challenges, the West held an unmatched beauty, a place of freedom and opportunity. It was a romantic landscape evoking adventure and the promise of the unknown. It's no surprise that from this untamed world arose the tradition of the singing cowboy and the distinctive music genre that we now call cowboy music. By the early 20th century, America's fascination with cowboys had only grown, and their music found its way into the mainstream media, from radio broadcasts to Hollywood films.
Those early years, so 33 is when Lynn Sly, Roy Rogers, Bob Dylan, and Tim Spencer first formed the group, and they were in Southern California, and it was a hotbed of music. That LA radio music market was so hot, and the radio, that was the only way to get known. That was the trip. So there's a lot of competition to get on the airwaves, and they did, and they were immediately successful. They had an audition, and they had worked up this fantastic trio yodeling number way out there. Probably familiar with that one.
Yeah.
And that was their signature song. So they went to the audition and said, "Okay, boys, what you got?" And they started singing that, and they'd been rehearsing this and other songs for some weeks, months even.
Yeah.
And the guys left the room in the middle of the audition. They were still singing,
No.
and the guys left the room and thought, "We're sunk." But when they finished the song, they said, "You guys want a show starting tomorrow?" And they put them on the radio right away, and then immediately put them on other shows on the radio. So they were working every day of the week on the radio, sometimes 2 or 3 shows a day.
Oh, wow.
So that was exciting, and they had these songs that nobody else had done in that style. Trio yodeling. Nope, that's new. And these songs that were so much, not necessarily about cowboy life. Certainly some were, but songs about the beauty of the West. The desert scenes, the trails. Those really resonated with people, and they still resonate with people.
Yeah.
So
I'd imagine it'd be very relevant to that early, like, Los Angeles audience who could go out and they could go see some of these things that the songs were talking about within, a little bit of a drive and a hike, maybe.
Absolutely. And that really still resonates with people. So we're delighted to be a part of that. Other early moments that were good for the pioneers, movies. They started doing movies in the 30s, and first they that's actually the the downside of that. Early on, it appeared, was Roy Rogers, who was still going by his birth name, Leonard Sly. That was a movie contract, replacing Gene Autry. And so he left the group after having been in it for 3 years and starting the group, and he left. So it was an opportunity for the band to take a dive, but instead it gave them other film opportunities. So Roy Rogers, as he was known then, his stage name, was working for Republic Pictures, and he couldn't work with the Pioneers. They had a different band under contract. So the Pioneers hooked up with Charles Starrett and did that was, I don't know, 20, 30 films with him. And those were successful. And this was new stuff. This was when music was just being introduced into
Right.
films, and nobody knew how that was going to go. But it was a huge boon for the pioneers. And then a few years later, um, Roy Rogers was able to hire the pioneers. The studio brought him in. So the pioneers and Roy Rogers teamed up for a bunch of films. That was recording 1934 with Decca. And, that was a brand new studio, Decca, in California. So Pioneers were one of the first groups that they hired or recorded with. That was in 34. And at the same time, that was with along with these commercial recordings were radio transcription recordings. A lot of people don't know about these, but it was
Oh,
hugely. Do you know about these?
I don't.
Yeah. So the studios, the music companies, recording companies would create recordings not that was meant for commercial distribution. They would rent them. They would send them to radio stations throughout the country who wanted them. It was sort of a subscription service.
Right.
And that was for a radio listener in, Johnson City, Tennessee. There was, that was seemed like there's this band in the studio in their local radio station. And so that really, really caught fire. These standard radio produced these transcription recordings, 16-inch discs, wouldn't play on a regular machine.
Uh-huh.
And that really brought them to a national audience because radio stations all over the country were hearing this new music for the first time and falling in love with it.
In my journey exploring cowboy and western music, I had the pleasure of sitting down with several remarkable artists, each on their own path but united by a shared passion for this timeless tradition. I interviewed the lovely Kristen Harris, a master songsmith and storyteller, and Paul Elliott and Chuck Irvin, members of the Sons of the Pioneers. Though newer members of the band, they carry forward a 91-year-old legacy of this famous band. They uphold not only the pioneering spirit of the genre, but also a unique three-part vocal style where the melody isn't assigned to just one singer. Instead, it weaves seamlessly between them, creating a beautifully intricate tapestry of sound. I also had the pleasure of sitting down with Andy Hedges, a songster, storyteller, and guitarist from Lubbock, Texas, who's known for his collection of cowboy songs and poems, and has shared these musings everywhere from cowboy poetry gatherings to the Grand Ole Opry and all the way to Carnegie Hall in New York City.
My name is Kristen Harris, and I started playing guitar when I was about 14 years old. Didn't grow up like in a family that played or sang music, so it wasn't something I, ever really had the aspiration to do. But I got a horse when I was 11 and just got, went full bore down that path. Um, Never grew out of that. But
I know I've seen lots of cool stuff on your Instagram.
yeah, so I still ride a lot, love horses, and that was kind of the initial spark because that led me into like I've always kind of also been an old soul a little bit, and so my family doesn't play or sing, but my dad would listen to classic country music. And I got into the old Western movies, and there's cowboys riding horses and playing guitar and singing songs, and I just really got inspired by all that. That's what made me want to pick up a guitar for the first time. And it started out with just learning some chords out of a book. I was so musically clueless, but I it the journey it was I wound up I was also very, very shy, very introverted is my personality. So it I had plenty of stage fright. But I got talked into doing an open mic. I taught myself to yodel from listening to the old cowboy movies. And from that open mic, I got connected with um an organization called the Cowtown Opry in Fort Worth. Um,
Cool.
yeah, and what they do is specifically the old Western cowboy songs and Western swing. It's a nonprofit that
Yeah.
kind of mentors people to do it. Yeah, and so that gave me performance opportunities. So I got some stage experience and just getting to be around other musicians, which helped a lot. Um, and there was a lady named Devin Dawson specifically in charge of it who really was my inspiration for playing guitar. So that's kind of how my musical journey started. I draw inspiration from a lot of different artists, and as far as Western artists, like there's some current day ones that I really love. I mean, Dave Stamey, Cora Blund are two kind of I'm really big fans of their songwriting.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I love Andy Hedges. There's those are kind of the more contemporary. I mean, initially when I started playing, like I was listening to, Sons of the Pioneers, um, Bob Wells and the Texas Playboys, and I still love all that stuff too. This is the cool thing about um, this Western genre is that when I travel and go and play places, the people are so amazing. I feel like I've got a family all over the US, all over the world, really. Um, but that's just a segue into that I have some kind of adopted family up in Idaho that are family to me, and they have a ranch up there. And I actually have some of my own cattle on their ranch.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, it's amazing. But the times I go visit them and spend time on the ranch, I get so much inspiration from being there and from them as well. And so I feel like there's a good chunk of my songs that have come from them or from experiences I've had with them on their ranch. Yeah.
How did you start playing with the Sons of Pioneers? Are you still with them? I can't remember if I looked
I
them.
am, yeah. I'm just about to go into my 8th year, just about to finish year 7 with them. And I live in Seattle, Washington. The rest of the band's spread out. At the time I joined, 3 of them were based around Branson, Missouri.
Oh, cool.
And I got in, not to make a short story too long, but about 10, maybe 15 years ago, I was doing a lot of studio work around the
Mhm.
area here, and a woman named Susie Spencer contacted me to play fiddle on her recording project, and she was going to record a bunch of songs of the Sons of the Pioneers.
Yeah.
She's a distant relative of Tim Spencer, who is one of the founding members. So she knew a lot about the music. And originally I said, no thanks, because I was mostly familiar with the Sons of the Pioneers from their recordings, from maybe the 60s through the 70s.
Right.
And they weren't really using a fiddle player. And I thought, that doesn't sound like all that much fun. And she said, well, I'm actually interested in some of the older stuff that wasn't recorded later. Why don't I send you some recordings? And she
Okay.
did. She sent me some stuff from the 30s and 40s, and it just knocked me out, because I don't know if you've listened to the old band, but Hugh Farr was
Uh-huh.
their original fiddle player, and he was quite a fiddle player. And
Oh yeah. I've listened to some of the older recordings and even way back then. It's really cool to hear. Really cool fiddle stuff.
yeah, and I sort of didn't realize particularly how back in that day how integral the fiddle was to the sound of the band. So I wound up doing that recording, and it was a couple of dozen songs, including maybe 8 or 10 instrumentals, because the Farr brothers recorded a lot of instrumentals.
Yeah.
And so fast forward to 7 years ago, Susie, the singer, was working with the band doing some booking. And their fiddle player left, and they were looking for a new fiddle player. And she said, "Why don't you call this guy?" And it turned out that they had that recording.
Awesome.
So I got a call and talked to the guys in the band, and went out for some rehearsal, and the next week there it was. And so, in bluegrass, that's usually tight 3-part harmony. So you have a melody, and you have often a part above and a part below, or maybe 2 parts above. And they're exactly tracking what the melody is doing. So the melody goes up, tenor singer goes up, baritone singer comes up, melody goes down. The challenge of that is if the melody goes up really high, you're pushing your tenor singer way up there. If the melody comes down really low, you're pushing your baritone singer really low. So Lloyd Perryman came into the Pioneers back in the late 30s, I think, and their tenor singer was kind of getting creamed, having real vocal problems. So he figured out this way of doing it where each voice kind of stays in its register. So the melody starts here, maybe it starts in the middle voice, melody goes up. Now the tenor singer is singing the melody, and the middle voice is now singing a second harmony part below the melody. Melody comes back down. Now the middle voice has the melody again. Melody goes way down. Now the baritone singer has the melody. So it's one singer usually doesn't have the entire melody of the song.
Yeah.
And so that takes the strain. Everybody's usually singing in their range, and it's a really super homogeneous blend.
Right. I remember that the Everly Brothers have done a little bit of that in some of their recordings in the 50s and 60s. And then in bluegrass, Jim and Jesse McReynolds used to do that a lot, especially when they do 2-part and 3-part harmonies and kind of switch depending on where the melody was going. So that's really cool that that's where that came from.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I didn't know Jim and Jesse did that. I know, I've heard a lot of, and I've been in bands where, somebody will sing lead up into the chorus, and then they'll jump up to the tenor, and somebody else will take the lead or something like that for a whole part. I didn't realize they were sort of switching within a verse or something like that. It's cool.
Not super consistent. Like, it's not their style for their whole repertoire, but I have noticed it when studying certain songs, and I can kind of pick out which one is which. And sometimes they will do part of the, tenor part during a chorus, and then they'll jump back down to the melody. But there are some songs where they just kind of interchangeably move with the melody, which is really neat. How do you play a repertoire that's this historic, this old, played by a whole bunch of people? How do you play this and still stay true to the roots, but infuse your own artistry throughout it?
Yeah, well, one of the things that attracted me to this job was when I was first talking to Tommy, the band leader. I asked him, do I need to go out and learn the fiddle part for 350 songs? And said, no. He said, there's songs that we would like you to kick off in a certain way, mostly so we remember what's going to happen next. But after that, you just do whatever you want. So I was given a lot of artistic freedom, which is cool. But, sort of what ended up happening for me, and I've played a lot of different kinds of music. I played bluegrass. I played a lot of kind of standards, jazz.
Right.
I played Western swing, as one does if one's trying to make a living as a sideman. You play whatever you need to. What kind of wound up happening is as I was joining the band, I just started listening to all the Pioneers I could. And, we don't even know how many recordings there are, but if you just look at the standard transcriptions from the 30s, there's hundreds and hundreds of songs. If you, go all the way, you can pick any decade and there's a lot of songs. And what really started resonating with me was, as a fiddle player, was Hugh Farr. So, and there have been some really great fiddle players with the band.
Right.
Doc Denning and Dale Morris and Justin Branham,
Oh, yeah.
And they've all had their own approach. To me, musically, the repertoire, the interesting thing about it to me is it's its own thing.
Right.
There's some elements of Western swing, but it's not Western swing. There's elements of, I don't know, you'd almost call it folk music, but it's not
Yeah.
folk music. There's very simple, the cowboy songs, a lot of the songs are just really melodic. So what complemented that, as I was listening to years of the band playing, it's like there are a couple of really interesting things about the way Hugh Farr plays. He plays a lot, but he's very diatonic. You know what I mean? So you listen to a lot of, particularly a lot of Western swing players today. They're very jazzy, very chromatic.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Where the interest is coming is kind of the notes that aren't in the chords, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, the blue notes on the outside. Yeah,
The
I
blue
see.
notes are, you're running through a diminished chord that,
Yeah.
the band's not playing, but it gives you an interesting line. Just there's ways of constructing lines that are less tied to the chords. And, I started listening to Hugh, and it's like, wow, he's almost completely diatonic, which does two things. I mean, it keeps his playing sort of rooted in the stuff that's not jazzy. And
Right.
it also
Yeah.
means that to make your playing interesting, you have to think more of rhythm, of where you're playing, where you're stopping, what your phrases look like.
Sure, yeah, I'm Andy Hedges, and I'm from Lubbock, Texas, and I've been playing cowboy music really my whole life for the last 30 years or so. I started playing when I was a kid, about 13 or 14, and I sing old-time cowboy songs and play guitar and play banjo a little bit, and also have a real interest in traditional cowboy poetry, and I've recited poetry in my shows for many years. And I also produce a podcast about ranching and cowboy culture called Cowboy Crossroads. And so
Cool.
those are kind of the big things I spend my time on.
That's awesome. How'd you get into cowboy poetry?
When I was 13, I discovered Waddy Mitchell, and I had grown up out here in West Texas and kind of had an interest in all things cowboy and Western from the time I was a little kid. And I'd grown up also listening to the music my dad liked, which was old Western artists like Tex
Yeah.
Ritter and Jimmy Rogers and Sons of the Pioneers and Johnny Horton, and I loved all of that music and listened to it a lot, but I didn't really know anybody still played that kind of music. And
Yeah.
when I was 13, I saw an episode of Austin City Limits that was Michael Martin Murphey and friends doing a tribute to the American cowboy, and Murphy had just released his first album of cowboy songs.
Cool.
This would have been, early 90s. And his special guests were Don Edwards, Waddy Mitchell, Riders in the Sky, and the Sons of the San Joaquin. And so I heard Waddy on that, and Waddy did a poem about a dead cow in a stream, and I was just mesmerized and kind of hooked on cowboy poetry after that. And so I started seeking out anything I could find, recordings of Waddy and all the other musical artists as well, and
Yeah.
books, and all of that was flowing out of the movement at the Elko Cowboy Poetry Gathering. And so I became aware of that, and I started attending the regional gatherings here in Texas and just kind of immersing myself in the genre. You know how you do that when you get interested in,
Oh, yeah.
you kind of find your passion in life.
You just feel
And
like a sponge and you can't get enough of it.
absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of still what I'm doing. I still haven't had enough. But I just started immersing myself in it and collecting songbooks and old, books of classic cowboy poetry, and
Yeah.
eventually started performing. And here I am, 30 years later, the phone hadn't quit ringing yet.
How do you toe the line between, I guess, preserving the history of these poems, of these songs, and also putting your own spin on them? How do you walk that line?
Well, I'm never really married to any one, version of a song. And so I kind of naturally, just put my own spin on it because I do what I do, and
Right.
I sing how I sing and play how I play. Uh, I just always try to be honest about whatever that process is, and, keeping that history of the piece alive if I can, to talk about uh, who wrote it if I know, and
Yeah.
maybe who I learned it from, and then I play my own version. So that's kind of my deal. But I hope that people listen to me, and that when someone's a real big fan of this music, that through me they discover all these great musicians and artists who came before me that I've learned from, and
Right.
so that they're not only maybe hearing the history of where a song came from, but also the people who played that song, and looking up those great recordings. And
Do you
Yeah.
find that performing poetry is different than performing songs? I know it is technically, but in your own headspace, is it any different or is it pretty much the same?
well, it's it's certainly different. I've done them both for so long, I can kind of blend it almost effortlessly on
Right.
stage. Um, I think what I find is that they have a different effect on the audience,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it can be a real a real cool thing if you're the only artist at a music festival who recites poetry, and people aren't expecting it, and you can walk out and maybe recite a poem first rattle out of the box, and that actually gets people's attention. It's
Oh,
in
yeah.
some ways it's more awkward to ignore someone who's speaking on stage than someone who's playing music. It's a little easier to tune out the music, and so it has an effect on the room, which I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And I like the dynamic of going back and forth between spoken word and music, and
Yeah. I've
at
seen
the
your
same.
performances a couple of times and I've really enjoyed those shows. And especially
Oh,
when you're
thanks.
going back and forth between poetry and music, it's really fun and it's fun to hear the crowd so quiet that you could hear a pin drop when you're reciting poetry. It's a
Right.
really fun thing to see.
Yeah. Well, and the poetry kind of gives them the idea that this is something, that you need to listen to and pay attention to, and then that hopefully carries over to when you start singing as well. Because the songs
Hopefully.
I do, they're all about the stories, and so I
Yeah.
want people to listen and understand the words, and kind of go with me wherever those songs go.
Yeah.
I love the old time poetry too, and I think that what I love about that is it's not so much the subject matter, because that does vary, but I love the lingo from that, from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Just the Western and cowboy lingo that's captured
Yeah.
in that poetry is really, really special. And it's interesting. I was talking recently to Skip Gorman, old time cowboy singer who used to play with people like Bill Monroe, and he's also a great
That's
bluegrass
where I've heard that
player.
name before. I was
Yeah.
thinking it rang bells somewhere.
Yeah, and anyway, Skip was talking about how one of the things that's so special about cowboy music and cowboy poetry is the poetry in it. There's a
Right.
real uh, there's a real substance in the lyrics, there's a lot being said. It's really beautiful language. It captures this old time lingo, and there's these really wonderful stories and just a more serious lyrical quality than you find in other genres of music. And he
Yeah.
was comparing it to bluegrass, which he thought, is a little more repetitive and, uh, maybe predictable, but doesn't hold up as well as just poetry like these old time cowboy songs
Right.
do.
Country music is starting to make a big comeback, and cowboy music is finding its way back too. But for the genre to keep going, it's up to the younger generation of artists to pick it up and carry it forward. Cowboy music isn't just a style, it's a piece of history. A love letter from the American West to the tough folks who've made the land their home. It's about the cowboys, the settlers, and all of those who lived off the land, pouring their sweat and soul into everything they did. The Wild West has had a massive cultural impact, influencing everything from the way that we tell stories to how we view freedom, independence, and resilience. The legend of cowboys and pioneers continue to shape our national identity, and those same themes of strength and survival still resonate today. If we want to keep this music alive, it's up to the younger crowd to step in, to honor the stories, and keep sharing the heart of the West with the rest of the world.
There's not a lot of people who care about Western music in the scheme of music that's being produced, but those who care deeply. It's still true, maybe not quite as true, but this music, as you point out, is a cultural touchstone. And so it celebrates these songs, and the music certainly celebrates the West, but also a Western way of life. And because those movies too, there's still people who remember those movies, and especially with Roy Rogers. And there was a code for good living in all those movies. Uh, do the right thing, tell the truth, stand up for what you believe in, and be good to one another. Respect people, and but there were a lot of good versus evil. Well, only in every plot of those movies was there a battle between good and evil. So that resonates with people, and that is a culture that is fading in many ways. You don't have the kind of hero culture, the cowboy
Right.
who is doing right, fighting for right. So it's a different scene nowadays. But that is certainly um, part of the allure and the nostalgia, if you will, of a lot of this music in a lot of the minds of a lot of fans.
So as far as like Western culture goes, or cowboy culture, throughout, I guess, your travels with the pioneers, are you seeing any sort of resurgence in popularity or anything like that? I'm not sure if I'm the best person to be speaking on this because I live in the West. But I've seen definitely a big resurgence in um, country music, but also a little bit of Western culture too, as well. If not even just influenced slightly in certain popular artists who aren't Western artists, but it's definitely more Western flavored, I guess, is how I'd put it.
Yeah, that's um, it's a great topic, and certainly I think um, there have been some Western flavored films and TV series. Kevin Costner,
Yeah,
maybe chief among them. Um,
I don't know.
but
I don't know if people can think Western anymore and not go, "Oh yeah, Yellowstone,"
yeah, yeah.
which is
Uh,
neither here nor there, but
uh-huh. Uh, and you certainly see a lot of people wearing cowboy hats that weren't wearing cowboy hats before. So I guess in some, yes, I would agree. My experience is that there seems to be more interest maybe than there was before. Culture, I guess, cycles through a bit, right? But I can't. I'm going to getting to go to places. I've lived in um, Mississippi and Louisiana, Missouri, and California, and uh, it is thrilling to see the excitement for this music wherever we go. Um, I can't tell because I haven't seen it over the course of a decade. I can't quite personally vouch for a resurgence,
Right.
but there certainly is great interest, and so that's thrilling and gives us hope.
Prior to the pandemic, we haven't been back since then, but we used to tour 2-3 times a year up in Canada, in Western Canada.
Oh, neat.
And it's, I don't think we think of this down here, but Southern Alberta and parts of Southern BC is real cowboy country.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all cattle country. And I've talked to so many people out there, maybe a little bit older than me, who said, yeah, when I was a kid, the only entertainment we had, they were isolated. They're basically
Right.
hemmed, they got the Rocky Mountains go into the sky on one side of them and then just nothing but prairie on the other side. Said the only entertainment we had was radio. And, the only thing on the radio or for a lot of the day was Sons of the Pioneers. So there's this whole
That's
real
cool.
hardcore cowboy culture up there that grew up listening to the Pioneers. It's pretty cool. So we always love going up there, and it's beautiful country.
Do you feel like there are some artists that are kind of, I guess, carrying the mantle on? I definitely think Kristen Harris is, for sure. Definitely in a traditional way, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the International Western Music Association. You're
Yes.
very familiar with that, and
I'm
they've
friends
got
with Kristen and Haley Sandoz, and Haley's won. She wins instrumentalist almost every year. She's incredible.
she really is. Yeah, they both are. Um, so yeah, absolutely. There are two excellent examples, but there's a lot of other players, young and old, in various states. The IWMA has chapters in several states, so that is a good organization that's keeping interest up, and it's a kind of a clearinghouse isn't the right word, but it is a bit of a gathering spot for people who care about Western music in a world that largely doesn't care
Right.
about Western music.
Right.
Uh, so in the Western music world, there aren't a lot of ensembles like the Sons of the Pioneers.
Right.
The Riders in the Sky is the primary example of an ensemble, four-piece ensemble that are doing things in the style of the Pioneers. So that has implications for the harmonic structure, which is absolutely unique.
Right.
Yeah. And then the instrumentation, especially in combination with the fiddle.
Yeah, the Opry was really great. That was about, I guess, a year and a half ago. Maybe that was 2 years ago, but that was really a great honor. And I can't say that I actually even had that on my radar because I've never thought of myself as a country singer.
Yeah.
I've always thought of myself as a cowboy singer. And so, although I'm more aware now that there was actually quite a history of cowboy and Western music at the Opry, it just wasn't something that I thought about myself being a part of. And
Sure.
so it was a really wonderful surprise to get the invitation, and
That's so
had a great time. I was really kind of taken with the audience. You know, they were really enthusiastic. You know, I wasn't quite sure how old time cowboy music would go over, but it felt like they were right there with me and very supportive. And my friend Bridget Reedy played fiddle with me, and I did a duet with Dom Flemons. And
cool.
yeah, it was really a wonderful, wonderful evening for sure.
That's really neat. Do you remember who else played that night?
I remember at least a few of the people. Riders in the Sky played, which was fun because I was already friends with the Riders, and they do, you know, cowboy and western stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, Dom Flemons, he had his own set and played. Rhonda Vincent played. Gary Mule the comedian and singer, he was there that night.
Cool.
And there were 2 or 3 more modern artists that I wasn't really familiar with, that I'd have to think a little bit to remember those names. But
That's really neat. That's neat.
yeah, it was cool, and it's a fun experience just being backstage at the Opry.
I'm sure.
All of the history there, and they make you feel like
Super
$1,000,000 bucks. You know, they have a special parking spot for you, and you get your own dressing room, and you know it's pretty cool. And my family was there, and a lot of friends came, and so it was
how
quite
fun.
experience. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Do you have any other shows or stages that you've played on that you just thought, man, that was cool?
Yeah, you know, another big highlight was another recent one. In fact, it happened after the Opry. I was invited to do a performance of my record, Roll On Cowboys, which is all duets with other artists. And I was invited to do a performance of that with all of my guests at Carnegie Hall in New York City.
That's crazy.
That was a really incredible experience as well, because you know, just another prestigious stage, and not really one that you would think of as featuring cowboy music. And
Oh yeah,
so
I'd even think of that. I'd think of the Opry before I thought of Carnegie Hall.
yeah, I probably would too. But it was really, really wonderful. It's just a beautiful venue, one of the best sounding rooms in the world, and had a great audience for that. It was a mix of, you know, New Yorkers and local folks, and then a lot of my cowboy and rancher friends who flew in from all over the country to support me. And so there was a lot of boots and hats in Carnegie Hall that night, and
Oh, awesome.
that was really a spectacular experience. And you know, there's so many. I've just been so blessed with great opportunities. I tend to think more about the people I've shared stages with than
Oh
the
yeah.
stages I've played. And I've been really blessed to get to play with a lot of my heroes, people like Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Tom Russell and Don Edwards, Glenn Orland, and Waddy Mitchell. You know, the list
Oh,
kind of
how
goes on
cool.
and on.
How do you feel about the modern state of Western music and country music? Do you see Western music having an uptick in popularity as well as country music, or do you think they're different?
Well, I do think they're different. I mean, currently,
Right. Not different in genres, but on a different trajectory as far
oh,
as popularity
I
goes.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was my bad.
Well, I still think probably my answer is yeah, they're probably different. I do see, like you said, an uptick in the popularity. I know that like I said, when I was 14 and I first started playing, I went to the International Western Music Awards for the first time, and like I was the only young person there, the
Oh,
only one.
wow.
I mean, and now you attend that, and there's this whole crop of young people that are doing it and doing it really well, and poetry too.
Right.
And it's I'm kind of like amazed, like, how did that happen in just a few years? And it's really cool. It's really encouraging. Um, so yeah, I'm seeing what you're seeing. And then I was just talking with my husband yesterday about um how the whole Western culture is kind of becoming popular again. Like, back in the day, back in the 40s and 50s, there was lots of Western stuff coming out of Hollywood, which was a part of why, like, every little boy and girl wanted to be a cowboy or cowgirl and wanted to dress like them. And now we've got totally different stuff, but it's starting to come back in the media, Yellowstone and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. Like, you see a lot a lot of people like wanting to play cowboy or be, there. But I just think that the cowboy, the West, is something that has always fascinated the American public, and
Yeah.
really more than America. But um, yeah, it doesn't take much to kind of uh, capture people's um, interest in that. So yeah, I'm encouraged by where Western music seems to be going. Country music, I've been less than encouraged in recent times, just of what, is coming out of Nashville, but then also seeing some artists that are doing some cool stuff. So yeah, there is really a lot of good stuff um for both genres, I think.
I think one of the reasons that people love Western culture so much and cowboy culture is that we're not exactly afraid. Um, we're not exactly afraid to be authentic, to write songs about what we want to write about, to do our own thing, and not necessarily follow a trend. Um, I think that's one thing that kind of draws it, and it's just such a rich culture. It's such a rich and diverse culture across the whole United States. Like, I grew up in southeastern New Mexico, and I'm sure like my little version of cowboy culture is different than your version, which is different than maybe someone who grew up in Oregon. But it all comes down to, I think, an authentic culture from a lot of really, really great people just passing their values and their music and their practices along to the next generations. And I think that really draws people into something maybe a bit more authentic and fun.
I think you said that well. Yeah, people are drawn to authenticity, and there's definitely that strong element in the
Yeah.
Western culture. Yeah, and just sharing those real stories and their real life.
So I did want to ask that I've noticed that Western music has made kind of a resurgence in popularity. Kind of a lot of the more roots music has. Folk has, bluegrass is on the up again, country's definitely on the up, and everything that kind of falls under that um big umbrella. And I'm just wondering if you guys have noticed the same thing or.
Yeah. And it's really cool to see. I mean, some of the artists, young, I'll call them young artists because they're young to me. There's all these people like, I don't know, Cole Wall and
Canadian guy, yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I saw a recording of him the other day singing a song called Cowboy, which is a song written by
Oh,
this guy Stan Jones, same guy who wrote Ghost Riders and
yeah.
stuff. We do that song.
Oh, me too, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, Cowpoke, really? Yeah,
Yeah,
cool. Do you sing
I
any other
actually
Stan
do.
Jones song?
Um, I don't think so. I think it's just cowpoke, but I do the whistle part on my fiddle, which is really fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, people like that. Sierra Farrell. There's all these young artists coming up and doing, sort of their version of Western stuff. There's some really good writers, um, and I'm really happy to see that.